There is this moment in every economic cycle where the grand visions of the future suddenly have to produce an actual receipt. It is that really uncomfortable transition from talking about what a new technology could do to, looking at the bank account and asking what it actually costs to build.
We are definitely seeing that transition in the markets as of late July 2026,
Hmm.
because the theme across the global economy right now is, well, the price of reality. We are watching what happens when massive, unchecked hype collides with the cold, hard requirements of capital expenditure.
Which is exactly what we are untangling in our stack of research for this deep dive into the source material. We are looking at everything from why artificial intelligence stocks are sliding despite incredible earnings to a bizarre mathematical quirk in the British welfare system that literally penalizes families for working.
And we also have to look at the looming regulatory battle over prediction markets. But, I mean, the best place to see this reality check in action is in the global tech markets. Like on Tuesday, trading on South Korea's benchmark cost speed index actually had to be temporarily halted by a circuit breaker after sliding 8%.
Wow, an 8% slide triggering a halt is massive, especially since market data showed it eventually closed down almost 11%. And that slump was led entirely by technology firms, right?
Exactly. Giants like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix fell by more than 13%.
It is wild when you consider SK Hynix just made that record-breaking debut on the Nasdaq in mid-July at $149 a share, and now they're trading well below that offer price. Plus, this isn't just an Asian market phenomenon.
No, not at all. NVIDIA fell 5% in New York on Monday, losing its position as the world's most valuable listed company to Apple. Which is so fascinating because Apple overtook NVIDIA specifically because Apple is one of the few tech firms not currently spending billions of dollars on AI data centers.
That is the capital expenditure, or CapEx, hangover in a nutshell. Investors are suddenly looking at the sheer volume of money being poured into AI infrastructure and asking when it will actually earn a proper return. I mean, major financial papers reported NVIDIA is in talks to provide around $250 billion for an open AI data center project.
When you see numbers that large, the market psychology shifts from, growth at all costs to show me the money.
People always compare this to a gold rush where investors are buying up the shovel makers, but this feels completely different. This is more like companies are building a $1 trillion 10-lane superhighway across the entire country, and investors are suddenly standing on the overpass realizing there are no toll booths and absolutely no cars driving on it yet.
They are panicking about the concrete costs. And the ultimate example of this herd behavior is Corning. So they make the fiber optic glass that serves as the connective tissue for these massive AI data centers. On Tuesday, they reported earnings that completely beat expectations. Revenue was up 17% to $4.74 billion.
And how did the market reward them for beating expectations? The stock plummeted between 12 and 18%.
Which is crazy because the underlying dynamic behind that sell-off completely ignores the fundamental technology shift happening right now. The market is treating all AI infrastructure as one monolithic bucket, but Corning's business model is actively evolving. During their earnings call, management noted their current revenue only reflects scale-out fiber demand.
By scale out, they're referring to the traditional connections between server racks across a massive data center, right? But the future of their business, the real growth engine, is in scale-up photonics.
Right, which means they are developing co-packaged and near-packaged optics, where the optical engine is fused directly onto the circuit board, right next to the processing chip itself.
Wait, does that mean they are taking the fiber optic cables out of the walls and embedding the glass right onto the computer motherboard?
That is the exact architectural shift, yeah. Because as AI chip clusters get denser and require higher bandwidth, the physical limits of traditional copper wire become a massive bottleneck. Copper generates way too much heat and loses too much signal over distance at those extreme speeds.
So glass fiber literally has to replace it inside the server rack itself. That underlying architecture is why Corning's multi-year targets project a $40 billion annualized sales run rate by 2030, even while the market indiscriminately sells them off this week.
Speaking of monumental wealth evaporating on paper, there's another massive reality check happening over in Elon Musk's companies. Between SpaceX and Tesla, roughly $1.2 to $1.5 trillion in market capitalization has been erased since mid-June. SpaceX alone has seen its stock drop almost 50%, from its high of $255 down to around $113.
That drop is creating an incredibly complex scenario for options traders, particularly because SpaceX has its first earnings report coming up, which triggers a unique insider lockup expiration. Typically, insiders have to wait 180 days to sell shares after an event like this.
But for SpaceX, the lockup ends on August 6th, just 2 days after earnings. That puts 900 million shares, which is about 20% of their eligible locked-up stock on the table to be traded.
For anyone who doesn't spend their day staring at options chains, the data shows an implied volatility of 160 for contracts expiring August 7, and people are buying 330 strike calls. What does that actually translate to in plain English?
Well, implied volatility is basically a thermometer for fear and greed in the market. A normal stable stock might sit around an implied volatility of 20 or 30. Tesla, which is famously volatile, is sitting around 52. So SpaceX sitting at 160 means traders expect an absolute earthquake after that earnings report.
And buying a 330 call when the stock is currently at 113 is basically buying a lottery ticket, because the trader only makes money if the company magically triples in value by Friday.
Exactly. You have retail speculators buying these wild lottery tickets, while the big institutional traders are hedging and playing it incredibly safe. When you take 900 million shares of locked-up billionaire and insider equity and suddenly make it liquid, you are testing the actual foundation of what that company is worth on the open market.
While billionaires are navigating a high-stakes game dictated by federal lockup rules, everyday people are being trapped by a very different set of government math in the UK labor market. This is a perfect example of how well-intentioned rules create devastating real-world outcomes.
UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham is currently rolling out a £30 million policy to try and fix a massive glitch in the universal credit system. Right now, if a teenager from a family on government benefits decides to take a paid apprenticeship, they might earn about £258 a week.
But because they are now officially in paid employment, the government automatically slashes the family's overall benefits. Let me look at the actual numbers from official Social Security figures here. If a single parent has a disabled child and that teenager takes an apprenticeship, the family could lose up to £340 a week in benefits.
They earn £258, but they lose £340. The household is literally financially punished for the kid getting a job.
That math actively incentivizes them to stay out of the workforce. It is a structural penalty for economic mobility. So Burnham's solution is to offer a bursary of up to £4,500 a year to replace those lost universal credit payments.
And to pay for this, the government is funding it through a tax on employers who have wage bills over £3 million.
Wait, you are trying to fix a leaky pipe by just putting a bucket underneath it and taxing local businesses to pay for the bucket? It doesn't fix the fundamental plumbing of the benefit system itself. You are taxing employers to fund a bursary that only exists because the government's own benefit math is broken in the first place.
The macroeconomic pressure driving this desperate approach is the staggering number of what policymakers call NEETs young people, not in education, employment, or training. Official figures show over 1 million 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK fall into this category.
Former Health Secretary Alan Milburn actually warned that 1 in 6 young people could become a NEET in the next 5 years. So the government is essentially trying to bypass its own bureaucratic red tape because they simply cannot afford a lost generation of workers.
Right. They're trying to pivot the education system by 2028 to offer technical subjects like manufacturing and AI starting at age 14, just to balance out the heavy prioritization of university degrees.
By the way, if you love untangling these kinds of economic paradoxes, you can find Financial Candy, Brain Candy, and classic audiobooks at clarenarratio.com.
In a related development regarding the actual plumbing of a system, let's look at how governments define the rules of the market itself, because there is a massive jurisdictional tug-of-war happening right now over prediction markets.
On Monday, 44 state attorneys general sent a letter to the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, basically telling the federal agency to back off regulating sports-related prediction markets.
The conflict comes down to legal definitions. So the CFTC and the platforms running these markets argue that an event contract is a swap. The states argue that betting on the outcome of a game is just sports wagering, which is firmly under state jurisdiction.
The CFTC actually drafted a proposed rule attempting to define gaming as the sport itself, governed by rules and skilled activity. But the derivatives marketplace CME Group immediately pushed back, arguing that defining gaming as the sport, rather than the financial wager on the sport, is a massive federal overreach.
Because when the CFTC labels an event contract a swap, they are trying to classify it as a highly regulated financial instrument rather than a casino game.
When I hear the word swap, I think of 2 big commercial banks exchanging financial risks, like trading fixed interest rates for floating ones. The fact that they're arguing a sports bet is technically a financial derivative is wild.
And while the lawyers fight over the definition of sports betting, the real weirdness is happening in what are called mentions markets on platforms like Kalshi. Imagine sitting in a Monday morning meeting and running a betting pool on whether your boss is going to say synergy or pivot.
Now scale that up to Wall Street. Users aren't just betting on whether a company is profitable. They are betting on the specific vocabulary executives will use during earnings calls. For Meta's upcoming call, market data showed traders priced a 91% chance that management will say the word cloud and a 74% chance they mention Ray-Ban, their smart glasses partner.
They are literally treating human speech patterns on a corporate conference call as a tradable financial derivative. And if we look at how these battles over definitions play out on the global stage, we see the exact same dynamic in international trade.
Consider the recent legal maneuvering regarding U.S. import taxes. The Supreme Court recently struck down Donald Trump's global tariffs, ruling that he did not have the authority to impose them under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The court effectively said the chosen statute did not permit that specific economic action.
So the response wasn't to abandon the tariffs, but to just change the legal label. This past Friday, the administration instantly imposed identical 10 to 12.5% tariffs on over 80 countries.
But this time, they cited Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, framing it entirely around penalizing countries that failed to prohibit forced labor. It is an absolute masterclass in jurisdictional categorization.
The Liberty Justice Center immediately filed a lawsuit arguing that changing the stated rationale doesn't make an unlawful tariff lawful, but as an economic reality, the dynamics remain identical. The goods hitting the ports still face the exact same tax. They are simply processed under a different paragraph of the federal code.
It really shows how dependent the physical economy is on the invisible architecture of legal phrasing. And those shifting legal architectures have massive, heavy physical consequences on the global supply chain.
We saw Games Workshop, the company that makes Warhammer miniatures in the UK, report in their annual financials that they paid roughly £12 million in U.S. tariffs. They managed to reclaim about $7.8 million following that Supreme Court ruling, but they are already projecting $13 million in tariff costs for the next business year due to the changing U.S. rules.
They basically have to budget for legal uncertainty as a standard operating cost. But beyond the legal hurdles, companies are also navigating physical disruptions to their materials. Ford Motor Company just raised its 2026 earnings forecast to between $10 billion and $11 billion on Tuesday, largely because they are successfully bouncing back from a massive physical supply chain failure.
Their F-Series truck production was completely crippled after Novelis, the supplier that provides their aluminum, suffered 2 fires at a New York facility. Ford expects to recover about $2.5 billion of the vehicle volume they lost due to that incident.
But instead of just looking at the balance sheet recovery, how do you actually bounce back from your primary aluminum supplier catching fire twice? That requires aggressively rerouting your entire supply network, right?
You have to immediately implement dual sourcing for raw materials, negotiate emergency contracts with secondary smelting facilities, and completely redesign your logistics routes to bring in heavy metal from different regions without halting the assembly lines.
It is an incredible logistical feat to absorb that kind of shock and still raise your earnings forecast. Boeing is pushing through a similar physical manufacturing recovery. Under CEO Kelly Ortberg, they just posted $631 million in free cash flow for the second quarter, which completely crushed Wall Street's expectation that they would burn cash.
Free cash flow is basically the money left over after a company pays all its operating expenses and capital expenditures. It is the purest indicator of financial health, because it is the actual usable cash a business generates to pay down debt or return to shareholders.
And they are generating that cash while finally ramping production of the 737 MAX up to 47 planes a month this summer. What is remarkable is they are pulling this off while absorbing a brutal $280 million charge on the delayed, over-budget Air Force One contract they signed back in 2018.
The physical supply chain is constantly adapting to pressure, whether that pressure is a fire in an aluminum plant, an FAA production cap, or in one of the most unexpected developments currently happening in Europe, a regulatory war on glue.
This is such a fascinating hidden detail in our daily lives. To meet new European Union packaging and packaging waste regulations kicking in this August, which mandate that packaging must be 70% recyclable by 2030, the industry has to eliminate adhesives. In the recycling world, they call them stickies.
When you throw a cardboard box in the recycling bin, the glue holding it together causes absolute chaos. Because of the temperature changes in the paper pulping process, standard glue turns into a gummy mess that jams up the massive recycling machinery and ruins entire batches of recycled paper pulp.
The challenge is that you cannot just remove the adhesive. You still have to seal the package securely, especially when dealing with food. Official reports show 3 German engineering and chemical companies, Fraunhofer, Hermann Ultraschall, and Henkel, are developing entirely new ways to bond paper without foreign materials.
The Fraunhofer project is developing a laser-based heating process that seals paper packaging to itself, and Hermann Ultraschall is approaching it with ultrasonics.
They're essentially using high-frequency sound waves to vibrate the paper fibers so fast that the friction melts them together, creating a permanent bond purely through kinetic energy. But you can't just flip a switch and use lasers or sound waves across the board.
No, because the entire packaging industry has millions of dollars invested in legacy assembly lines designed exclusively to pump hot glue. Retrofitting those factories is a massive capital expenditure challenge. Plus, you can't use intense heat on everything.
Or if you are packaging chocolate or yogurt, you use a barrier-coated paper to keep the moisture out. If you hit that with a laser, you ruin the food inside.
Which is exactly why Henkel's Adhesive Technologies division developed a cold seal solution. It relies strictly on applying intense pressure to bond the barrier-coated paper against itself, without requiring any heat at all.
It allows brands to transition from plastic wrapping back to paper without introducing unrecyclable stickies into the supply chain. It is incredible to think about the layers of complexity required just to hold a cardboard box closed.
Whether we are talking about the delicate fiber optic glass connecting a multi-billion-dollar AI data center, the specific legal statute authorizing a federal tariff, the bizarre government math calculating a teenager's welfare benefits, or the ultrasonic friction sealing your groceries, the economy is held together by these entirely invisible architectures.
And the recurring lesson across all these markets is that whenever one of those bonds is stressed by technological hype, by a court ruling, or by a new environmental regulation, the resulting shockwave forces a massive reallocation of capital. The money doesn't just disappear, it flows aggressively toward whoever can build the new foundation to hold the system together.
Which is the exact shift we are tracking right now.
So the next time you open a seamlessly sealed package or watch a supposedly bulletproof tech stock tumble in the markets, ask yourself, what invisible rule or assumption is actually holding this thing together, and who stands to make a fortune when that bond finally breaks?